My name is Belinda C. Bender, and I'm 36 years old. If you had told me a few years ago that my own brother would treat me and my son like an afterthought, I probably would have laughed it off, because I used to believe family had a bottom line it wouldn't cross. Matt and I weren't always like this. Growing up, we were close in that uneven way siblings can be. Him, the confident golden boy who could charm anyone. Me, the quiet one who wanted peace more than victory. He was 2 years older, taller, louder, and our parents adored him for it. I didn't mind, not really. I learned to blend into the background, to find contentment in small things: books, quiet mornings, time with my son. But lately it felt like Matt had gone from being the show-off older brother to something meaner, sharper, like every small success I had was a threat to him. I got divorced 3 years ago. My ex-husband and I co-parent our son Ethan, who's 9 now. He's bright, curious, and way too perceptive for his age, the kind of kid who watches adults' faces even when they think he isn't paying attention. After the divorce, my family, especially Matt, acted polite but distant, like I'd brought some invisible bad luck with me. I tried to stay connected anyway. Family dinners, birthdays, holidays. I'd show up, smile, bring gifts, and pretend not to notice when Matt's wife, Olivia, made her little digs about single moms needing help or how some people can't handle commitment. It was never direct enough to call out, just sharp enough to sting, and the worst part was the way she'd smile right after, as if the smile made it harmless. Last month, Mom decided to celebrate her birthday early with a family lunch. She said it would be nice to keep things simple, so she suggested we all meet at this new Italian restaurant in town, the kind with exposed brick and candlelight and menu descriptions that read like poetry. I was honestly looking forward to it. It had been a rough week, and Ethan had been excited about Grandma's special spaghetti day, as he called it. I got us both dressed up a bit, nothing fancy, just jeans and button-downs, and we drove over. In the car, he told me about his science fair project and asked if Grandma would like his drawing of a robot chef, and I remember thinking maybe this would be one of those ordinary good days that make life feel steady. When we got there, Matt and Olivia were already seated with my parents, laughing, drinks already half finished. The table was a long booth near the window, prime real estate, and Matt sat like he owned the place. I walked up smiling anyway, because that's what I've always done. I keep things smooth. I keep the air calm. I refuse to hand Matt the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "Hey, everyone," I said, resting my hand on Ethan's shoulder. He smiled and waved politely like I taught him, sweet and careful, wanting approval without knowing why. Matt barely looked up. He glanced at Olivia, then back at me, with a lazy smirk. "Oh," he said, "you actually came." "I said I would," I replied, trying to keep my tone light, though I felt a sting of embarrassment crawl up my neck. Mom smiled nervously, fingers twisting her napkin. "We weren't sure, sweetheart," she said. "You didn't text this morning." I blinked. "I didn't think I needed to," I said, still smiling, still playing nice, even as something in me tightened. The waiter appeared then, holding menus. "Are we waiting for anyone else?" he asked. Matt looked right at me and said, "No, we're all here." There was a pause so sharp it felt physical. I looked at the 2 empty chairs at the end of the table, then at Ethan, who was quietly holding my hand under the booth like he sensed something wrong. "Actually," I said, forcing a half joke, "I think those are for us." Matt chuckled. "We didn't order for you," he said, like that made perfect sense. I stared at him. "What?" Olivia leaned forward with a smile that hid a sneer. "We thought you might cancel, Belinda," she said sweetly. "You know, like last time. So we just ordered for the table. You can still sit, though. Maybe get something after we finish." Ethan looked up at me, confusion all over his face. "Mom," he whispered, "why didn't they order for us?" My throat tightened so fast I almost couldn't breathe. For a second I didn't know what to say. I felt everyone's eyes flick toward Ethan, then away, the way people look when they're uncomfortable and don't want to be responsible for it. I forced a smile anyway, because that's what I do. "It's okay, buddy," I said softly. "We'll figure it out." The waiter hesitated, looking between us. "Would you like me to bring another table, ma'am?" he asked, voice careful. Matt waved him off. "No need. They can stay if they want to watch." Olivia laughed lightly, touching Matt's arm as if she was tempering him. "Oh, come on," she said. "Don't be so mean. She knows we're joking." But the way she said it, like she was daring me to take it seriously, made it clear she wasn't joking at all. Something in me went cold, not rage, not yet, but the beginning of a boundary forming. I swallowed hard, kept my composure, and looked at the waiter. "We'll just grab another table," I said calmly. "If you could get us one nearby, that'd be great." He nodded quickly, sensing the tension, and guided Ethan and me to a small two-person table near the corner. It wasn't far, just close enough that we could still see them. Close enough that I could hear Matt's loud, cheerful voice carrying across the room like performance. Ethan climbed into his chair quietly. He wasn't pouting or whining, which almost made it worse. He was just disappointed, the kind of disappointment that sits behind the eyes and makes a child older for a moment. I tried to lighten the mood. "You want to pick the pasta this time?" I asked. "You're the expert." He nodded, voice small. "Can we still see Grandma after?" "Of course," I said, even though I wasn't sure if I believed it anymore. Across the room, I heard Matt's laugh and the clink of glasses like we weren't even there. Like we were ghosts in the same room. And I didn't know it yet, but somewhere between Ethan's quiet confusion and my brother's smug indifference, something had already started to shift. The waiter came by with menus and a pen, and I watched his eyes flick once toward my brother's table before he looked back at us. It was subtle, but I noticed it. The kind of small detail you catch when you've spent your whole life reading Rooms for Danger. Ethan sat with his hands folded neatly like he was trying to be extra well-behaved to earn space, and that nearly broke me. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to perform for love, but in that moment, love felt like something my family only offered when it was convenient. "You ready to order?" I asked him softly, keeping my voice light like I wasn't burning inside. He nodded and pointed at the menu. "Spaghetti," he said, "the one Grandma likes." "Good choice," I replied, swallowing down the ache in my throat. I ordered for us. Simple, normal, the kind of order you place when you're trying to pretend the world hasn't tilted. The waiter wrote it down, then hesitated like he was weighing something. "Your family?" he asked quietly, almost under his breath. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" He gave a faint smile, not friendly exactly, more like he'd just made up his mind about something. "Got it," he said, and walked away before I could ask what he meant. I tried not to think about it. Ethan and I talked about school, his art project, the science fair next week. I asked him about the class hamster that escaped during math, and he giggled, and for a few minutes, the tension loosened enough for me to breathe. Across the room, Matt's voice carried loud and bright. Olivia laughed with him, that polished laugh she used when she wanted people to think she was kind. My parents clinked glasses. The sound made my stomach turn. It felt like they were celebrating my absence. Then the waiter returned. 2 large steaming plates of pasta and garlic bread appeared in his hands, and when he set them down in front of us, I blinked in confusion. The plates looked exactly like what my mom always ordered. The same family-style portion, the same extra sauce on the side. It was too much for 2 people, and it wasn't what I ordered. I said carefully, leaning forward. "I think you might have mixed up the tables." The waiter smiled politely. "No, ma'am," he said. "This order is for you." I stared at him. "But I didn't—" He didn't let me finish. He just gave a small nod, like he knew exactly what he was doing, and walked away. Ethan's eyes widened. "Mom," he whispered, leaning closer like it was a secret. "Isn't that Grandma's favorite?" "Yeah," I said slowly, trying to piece together what was happening. I looked across the restaurant, and Matt's grin was gone. He sat frozen, fork halfway to his mouth, staring at our table like he was watching someone steal his wallet. Within minutes, the waiter returned with more dishes. Breadsticks, salad, a small dessert platter with tiramisu and cannoli, things I hadn't ordered. He set them down with calm precision, each plate landing like a quiet statement. Meanwhile, my brother's table sat untouched. No plates, no bread, no waiter. I watched Olivia's smile falter. I watched my mother glance toward the kitchen, confused. My dad stared down at the table like he was trying to understand a magic trick. Matt leaned back in his booth and waved his hand sharply at a passing server, but she didn't stop. She kept walking like she didn't see him. I didn't say anything. I just smiled at Ethan, picked up my fork, and started eating slowly, bite by deliberate bite. Ethan followed my lead, a giggle bubbling up like he couldn't help it, like he sensed this wasn't just food. It was something else, something unfair being reversed. "Is it okay?" he asked softly, eyes darting to my brother's table. "It's okay," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I meant it. Every time I looked up, Matt was glaring. Olivia had stopped smiling completely. My mother looked uncomfortable now, the way she looks when she wants peace, but doesn't want to confront the person causing the chaos. My dad's face stayed blank, but his eyes kept flicking between the tables like he could feel something shifting and didn't know how to stop it. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The waiter checked on us twice. "Everything good over here?" he asked warmly. "Perfect," I said, taking another slow bite. "Really, really perfect." He smiled and refilled Ethan's water without being asked. Across the room, Matt's patience evaporated. He started flagging people down, sitting taller, raising his voice slightly. Olivia crossed her arms and muttered something to him, her cheeks flushed. My mother's eyes were wide now, the confusion turning into a quiet dread because she could finally see the dynamic clearly, her golden son being ignored for once. By the 40-minute mark, Matt stood up halfway out of his seat and snapped his fingers at the waiter as he walked by. The waiter nodded politely, like he'd heard him, then walked right past and came to our table again instead. "Can I get you anything else?" he asked. Ethan looked up at me, trying not to smile too hard. I could see the effort in his face, the way he was still trying to be the good kid, the polite kid, even while something inside him lit up. "No," I said gently. "We're great." That's when the waiter finally walked over to Matt's table. He didn't bring plates. He didn't bring bread. He placed a small folded piece of paper in front of Matt and said something softly that I couldn't hear. Matt unfolded it, and his face went red, redder than I'd ever seen. He looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the waiter, like his brain couldn't accept what was happening. Across the room, I could almost read his lips. "Are you kidding me?" The waiter only smiled faintly and replied in a tone I could barely catch, but the last words carried clearly as he turned away. "Your order, your bill." The silence that followed was almost loud. Olivia stared at the paper, her mouth slightly open. My mom's face shifted from confusion to realization. My dad's gaze dropped to his lap like he didn't want to witness what his favorite son looked like when he lost control. Ethan finished the last bite of dessert and wiped his mouth carefully with his napkin, so polite it hurt. He looked at me and whispered, "Mom, did we win?" I leaned in and kissed the top of his head. "We didn't win," I said softly. "We were treated fairly." As I stood up, I didn't look at Matt. I didn't need to. I could feel his glare like heat against my back. I took Ethan's hand and walked out with the calm of someone who finally understood something important. I hadn't planned any of it. At least not exactly. But walking to the car with Ethan's small hand in mine and my brother's humiliation still hanging in the air behind us, I knew the quiet part. That was the moment everything changed between us. And I hadn't even done the real part yet. The days after that lunch were strangely quiet. No angry texts from Matt, no calls from my parents trying to smooth things over, no passive-aggressive messages wrapped in fake concern. Just silence. And honestly, I welcomed it. I wasn't proud of what happened at the restaurant, but I didn't feel guilty either. I hadn't planned the reversal, but when it unfolded, I didn't stop it. For once, someone else had experienced what it felt like to be treated as optional, and I wasn't sure Matt knew how to exist without being centered. Ethan brought it up once that weekend while we were making pancakes together. He flipped one badly and laughed, batter splattering the counter. "Mom," he said, "why did Uncle Matt get so mad? You didn't do anything." I wiped my hands on a towel and thought carefully before answering. "Some people don't like when things don't go their way," I said. "But we still choose to be kind." He nodded, serious. "Being kind is better." "Always," I said, though the word felt heavier than it used to. The storm came a week later. It started with a group text from Mom. "Sunday dinner at our place. Everyone's welcome. Let's keep it light and happy." I stared at the message longer than I needed to. Light and happy. In my family, usually meant don't talk about the thing everyone is thinking about. Ethan would be with his dad that weekend, which made the decision easier. Showing up alone felt safer, calmer. Maybe this would be a chance to reset, or maybe I just needed to see if anyone would finally say the quiet part out loud. When I arrived, Matt's car was already parked right out front, angled like he owned the driveway. I came in through the back door like I always had growing up and found Mom in the kitchen stirring something on the stove. She smiled when she saw me, but her shoulders were tight. "Belinda, I'm glad you came," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like obligation than comfort. "Where's Dad?" I asked. "In the living room," she said quickly. Then, lowering her voice, "Belinda, please just try to be patient tonight, okay?" I frowned. "Why? What's going on?" Before she could answer, Matt's voice cut through from the next room, loud and lazy. Oh, look, the guest of honor finally made it. I stepped into the living room. Matt was stretched out on the couch, legs crossed, a glass of wine in his hand. Olivia sat beside him, scrolling on her phone like she couldn't be bothered to look up. Dad was in his recliner, staring at the muted TV like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Hey, I said quietly, taking a seat on the far end of the couch. Matt smirked. Nice little stunt at the restaurant. I blinked. What stunt? He tilted his head, mock sympathy dripping from his tone. Don't play innocent. You must have said something to that waiter. You think it's funny to embarrass me in front of everyone. I didn't say a word, Matt, I replied evenly. You told the waiter we weren't coming. Maybe that caused the mix-up. He laughed, sharp and humorless. Right, the mix-up. Mom rushed in, drying her hands on a towel. Let's not start this again, she said quickly. It was one meal. Let's move on. But Matt wasn't done. You know what I think, he said, leaning forward. I think you liked it. Sitting there eating my food, watching me look stupid. That's the only way you ever get attention, isn't it? Olivia giggled softly without looking up. It was kind of funny. I felt heat rise in my chest, but my voice stayed calm. Funny, I repeated. You told me and my son we could watch if we were quiet. Mom's face fell. Dad shifted but stayed silent. Oh, come on, Matt said, waving his hand. You're too sensitive. It was a joke. We joke all the time. You joke, I said. Everyone else just goes along because you make it miserable if they don't. That got his attention. He straightened, smirk gone. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've been treating everyone like they revolve around you, I said, meeting his eyes. You've done it since we were kids. You take control, you take credit, and when someone doesn't play along, you turn it into a scene. He stood abruptly. You think you're better than me. I stood too, keeping my voice steady. No, I think I deserve respect, and so does my son. The mention of Ethan hardened something in him. Don't drag your kid into this, he snapped. Maybe if you'd spent less time playing the victim and more time being a wife, you wouldn't be divorced. The room went dead silent. Mom gasped softly. Matt? Dad finally looked up. That's enough. But it was too late. Something in me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly, like the last thread giving way. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just looked at him and said, You really have no idea how cruel you sound, do you? I turned toward the door. I'm done. I tried to be part of this family. I really did. But I'm not going to keep showing up just to be humiliated and told it's my fault. Then I stopped. There's something else, I said quietly. When Dad helped you get that promotion, I was happy for you. When he co-signed your house loan, I didn't say a word. But do you know what Mom told me last year? That you told her I was the reason Dad's been struggling to pay it off. Matt's jaw tightened. I saw the bank statements, Fab, I continued. You missed payments. Dad covered for you, and you blamed me. You told everyone I borrowed money and never paid it back. Mom looked shocked. Is that true? Matt didn't answer. Olivia finally looked up. That's not a big deal, she said casually. Families help each other. Besides, Belinda doesn't need the money. She's single, no mortgage, no real expenses. That's enough, I said sharply. You don't know anything about me. She smiled thinly. I just know what your brother tells us. I nodded slowly. Interesting. Because while you've been sitting here pretending everything's perfect, I've been watching Dad stress about money and Mom stretch her savings. So maybe the problem isn't me. Matt's face went from red to pale. You think you know everything. No, I said quietly. I just think people are starting to see you. He smirked again, desperate now. Fine. Maybe we should talk about that little loan you got 5 years ago. Or did you forget? Mom turned to me. What loan? My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Matt leaned back. You borrowed thousands from Dad when you were out of work, and you never paid it back. That was a gift, I said, and I paid him back, every cent. He shrugged. Sure you did. I saw the doubt flicker in my parents' eyes, and that was my breaking point. Not anger, not betrayal, just exhaustion. I smiled slowly. You're right, Matt. Maybe we should talk about it. All of it. His expression shifted, panic flashing beneath the bravado. The dinner ended the way it always did. Raised voices, half-truths, my parents begging for peace. But this time I didn't back down. Because the next morning, I opened my email and found something that proved exactly who my brother really was. And that was when everything truly began to unravel. The email arrived early Monday morning, the kind of quiet hour where the house still feels safe. I was packing Ethan's lunch, cutting his sandwich into neat triangles because that's how he liked it, when my phone buzzed on the counter. The sender's name made my stomach drop instantly. Harrison and Wells Financial Services. My father's old accountant. I hadn't heard from them in years, not since before the divorce, not since Dad insisted Matt help handle the paperwork when his arthritis got worse. For a split second, I thought it had to be spam, but curiosity, sharp and uneasy, made me open it. The subject line was short and clinical, regarding the matter of outstanding balances. Inside was a scanned statement, clean, professional, and right there, in bold, was my name. A supposed loan, $12,000, marked payment pending. My chest went cold. I knew that loan. I knew it because I'd paid it back. Every cent. 3 years ago, after the divorce, Dad had offered short-term help when I was between jobs. I'd repaid him within 6 months, carefully, methodically, with transfers I'd saved receipts for because I didn't trust memory when money and family mixed. But this document told a different story, one where I was irresponsible, indebted, and ungrateful. My hands started shaking as I scrolled. And then I saw it. Under the contact section, the listed representative for updates on the account wasn't my father. It was Matt. That was the moment the puzzle snapped into place. Matt hadn't just been talking. He hadn't just been spreading little comments or planting doubt. He'd been shaping a paper trail, using Dad's trust, his access, his role as the helpful son to quietly rewrite reality, to make it look like I was still borrowing, still owing, still the problem. I sank into a chair, the lunch forgotten on the counter, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. For years, I'd wondered why my parents' tone toward me had shifted from distant to guarded, why Mom asked careful questions about my finances, why Dad avoided eye contact when money came up. This was why. I forwarded the email to myself, then dug through my records until I found the transfers. The dates matched, the amounts matched, proof I'd paid him back, clear as day. And yet here was a professional firm treating it as unpaid because the information they'd been given said so. I called the number on the email. The woman who answered sounded polite, tired. Harrison and Wells, this is Dana. There's a mistake on a statement you sent me, I said, keeping my voice steady even though my pulse was racing. That balance was paid in full. She hesitated. Let me check the notes, she said, typing. Then, we were instructed by the account manager to mark it as outstanding. Who instructed you? I asked. Another pause. Your brother, ma'am. I thanked her and hung up before my voice could crack. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went to work, answered emails, smiled at coworkers, picked Ethan up from school and listened to him talk about a spelling quiz he aced. I nodded, praised him, hugged him longer than usual. Inside, everything was unraveling. That night, I called my parents. No answer. I tried again, straight to voicemail. 2 days later, I drove to their house. Mom answered the door, looking smaller than I remembered, tired lines etched around her mouth. Belinda, she said quietly, your father doesn't want to talk right now. Mom, please, I said. There's been a mistake. Matt. She shook her head slowly. I don't know what to believe anymore. The words hurt more than any insult Matt had ever thrown at me. I held out my phone, showing her the transfers, the proof. She barely glanced at it. Your brother said you promised to pay him directly when your father was sick, she said softly. And now this letter. That's not true, I said, my voice breaking despite my effort to stay calm. You know I wouldn't do that. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw doubt in her eyes. Not certainty, not trust. Doubt. I thought I did, she whispered, and then she closed the door. I didn't yell. I didn't knock again. I just stood there for a moment, staring at the wood grain like it might explain how things had gotten this far, then walked back to my car and drove home in silence. For the next month, I pulled back from everything. Family texts went unanswered. Calls ignored. I stopped defending myself because I was exhausted from explaining the truth to people who'd already decided what they wanted to believe. Even Ethan noticed. You're sad again, he said one night, sitting beside me on the couch. I'm just tired, buddy, I replied, forcing a smile. You don't laugh as much, he said quietly. That one hurt. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and made a promise to myself. No more letting Matt decide who I was. No more waiting for my parents to see what they didn't want to see. I couldn't fix what Matt had done. Not yet. But I could build something that didn't depend on him, on them, or on their approval. So I started small. I threw myself back into work, stayed late, took on side projects, picked up freelance contracts after Ethan went to bed. It felt good to earn without explanations, without anyone questioning my competence or worth. 2 months later, I was promoted. Not a huge leap, but enough to feel solid, earned. On weekends, I took Ethan to a community center where they ran a small robotics club. Watching him build, tinker, fail, and try again reminded me why I'd kept going all these years. I still had something real. Then one Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Belinda," she said, her voice trembling. "Can you come over? It's about your brother." I knew in that instant that the truth had finally caught up with him. I drove to my parents' house with my hands tight on the steering wheel, Ethan's empty booster seat in the back feeling louder than usual. Mom's voice on the phone hadn't sounded angry or defensive. It had sounded scared. That alone told me this wasn't another misunderstanding they wanted me to smooth over. This was something they couldn't ignore anymore. When I walked in, the house felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Dad sat at the dining table with a stack of papers spread out in front of him, his shoulders slumped like he was carrying a weight he'd finally realized was crushing him. Mom stood near the counter, arms folded, eyes red and rimmed with exhaustion. Matt wasn't there. "Sit down, Belinda," Dad said quietly without looking up. I hesitated, then pulled out a chair and sat. Mom slid a folder toward me. "We found things," she said. "Things your brother told us weren't important." Inside were bank statements, loan documents, handwritten notes, and printed emails. My name appeared on some of them, just like in the accountant's message, but the signatures weren't mine. The numbers didn't add up. Dates overlapped in ways that made no sense unless someone was deliberately moving money around. "He's been accessing our accounts for years," Mom said, her voice cracking, "transferring money, changing records, including that loan." I stared at the papers, relief and heartbreak colliding in my chest. Relief that I hadn't imagined it. Heartbreak that it had taken this long for them to see. Dad rubbed his forehead slowly. "He told us it was temporary," he said. "That you were helping him, that you didn't want us to worry." I swallowed hard. "I never said that." "I know," Dad said finally, looking up at me. His eyes were tired, older than I'd ever seen them. "We confronted him this morning." Mom's voice dropped to a whisper. "He left, packed a bag and walked out, said we'd regret choosing you over him." For a moment, no one spoke. The years pressed in around us, all the times Matt had spoken for me, over me, against me, and all the times my parents had let him. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, like something had finally been named but not healed. "I'm sorry," Dad said then, the words awkward and stiff, like they didn't get used often enough. "I should have protected you. I should have checked." Mom stepped closer and put her hand over mine. "We were wrong, Belinda, about so much." We talked for hours, about favoritism, about fear, about how easy it had been to lean on Matt and how hard it was to admit they'd been manipulated. Mom cried. Dad admitted he'd felt dependent on Matt's help with finances and ashamed of how little control he actually had. They didn't excuse themselves, and for the first time, that mattered more than any apology. When I left, Mom hugged me tightly, longer than usual. "We're proud of you," she whispered. "You did everything right." Driving home, I felt lighter but unsettled. I knew Matt too well to believe he'd disappear quietly. People like him didn't vanish when the spotlight turned. They circled back, looking for another angle. 2 weeks later, my phone rang from an unknown number. "You think you've won," a familiar voice said softly. I closed my eyes. "Matt," he laughed under his breath. "You really enjoy this, don't you? Playing the hero, turning Mom and Dad against me." "I didn't turn anyone," I said evenly. "You did that yourself." There was a pause, then his voice hardened. "You've ruined my reputation. Do you have any idea how that feels?" I exhaled slowly. "Maybe a little." Silence crackled between us. "You're not as smart as you think," he said finally. "This isn't over." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with recognition. This was how Matt operated. Quiet threats, small cuts meant to destabilize. Over the next week, strange things started happening. My boss forwarded an anonymous email claiming I'd lied on employment forms. A few freelance clients received messages from a fake account pretending to be me, offering suspicious discounts. One evening, a neighbor stopped me in the hallway. "Your brother came by last night," she said cautiously. "Said he was worried about you, that you seemed unstable." My stomach dropped. He wasn't trying to confront me. He was trying to unravel me, the same way he always had, quietly, methodically, planting doubt. Then, one evening, I opened my mailbox and found it pried open. Papers were scattered inside. Old court documents from my divorce, printed social media posts, even a photo of Ethan and me from years ago. Matt wasn't just lying, he was watching. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list. Not a revenge list, a truth list. Every lie, every forged document, every manipulation I could prove. I wasn't going to argue with Matt anymore. I was going to end his game. The first call I made was to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Olivia's older sister, Karen. They'd fallen out long ago, mostly because Karen couldn't stand Matt's arrogance. Karen worked in compliance for a financial firm and had a reputation for spotting fraud before it had a chance to breathe. When I told her everything, she didn't hesitate. "I believe you," she said. "Meet me tomorrow. I've been waiting for this." Karen chose a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where people minded their own business, and the barista remembered faces without asking questions. She was already seated when I arrived, a leather folder beside her coffee, posture straight, eyes sharp. She didn't waste time on small talk. "Matt's been sloppy," she said the moment I sat down. "Not with numbers, with ego." I exhaled slowly. "You think Olivia knows?" "She knows something," Karen replied. "Enough to be scared. He's been secretive for months. Late nights, calls he takes outside, money moving that doesn't match their lifestyle." She complained to me, but she didn't want to believe it. I nodded. "What do we do?" Karen leaned in. "We wait for her to realize embarrassment hurts less than betrayal." That opportunity came faster than either of us expected. A week later, I got a message from Olivia. Her tone was clipped, formal, but underneath it, I could feel tension vibrating through every word. "Karen told me to call you. Don't make me regret it." We met at a diner off the highway, neutral ground. She arrived wearing oversized sunglasses and a stiff expression, like she'd rehearsed how to look unbothered. She didn't order anything. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "That's fair," I replied. "You already know Matt's been lying to you. You just don't know how deep it goes." She scoffed. "You think you know my husband." "I know his patterns," I said calmly. "He takes. He blames. He hides. That's what he did to me. That's what he did to our parents. And from what Karen told me, that's what he's doing to you." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then why are you here?" I asked quietly. That landed. She stared into her coffee for a long moment, then said, "I found transfers. From my savings. Money I never spent. Every time I ask, he tells me I must be misremembering." "That's gaslighting," I said gently. "He's good at it." She reached into her bag and slid a small USB drive across the table. "He keeps everything on this. Expenses, invoices, transfers. He's paranoid, so he backs it up himself." I took it while he was in the shower. My breath caught. "Olivia, that's serious." "So is stealing from your wife," she said flatly. "If he tries to drag me down with him, I want someone else to have the proof." When I got home, I plugged the drive into my laptop. It was worse than I imagined. Folders upon folders of spreadsheets, invoices, emails, and scanned documents. One folder made my stomach drop. Family. Inside were loan forms under my name, my parents' names, even Olivia's. Figures altered. Duplicate entries. Signatures forged. Routing numbers, tracing back to Matt's accounts. He hadn't just manipulated narratives. He'd engineered dependence. I called Daniel, my new boss, who happened to have a background in cybersecurity. He didn't flinch when I showed him the files. "This is forensic gold," he said. "But if you rush it, he'll spin it. You want consequences, not noise." "So what do we do?" Daniel smiled faintly. "We let him expose himself." I sent Matt one message. "We need to talk about the family." He replied within an hour. "Finally. Meet me Friday." Friday came, and I didn't go alone. Daniel came with me, introduced as a consultant. We met Matt at a sleek downtown cafe where everyone pretended to work on laptops. Matt looked composed, confident, like he thought this was another conversation he could control. "You ready to apologize?" he said with a smirk. "I wanted to make peace," I replied evenly. "But first, there's something you should see." Daniel slid a tablet across the table and opened one of the forged documents. Matt's expression flickered for half a second. "Where did you get that?" he asked tightly. I smiled faintly. "Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing." He leaned back, trying to recover. "That's fake. You've been digging where you shouldn't." "Maybe," I said, standing up. Or maybe I'm giving you a chance to come clean before someone else finds out." For the first time, he had no comeback. As Daniel and I walked out, Daniel whispered, "He's rattled." "Good," I said. "Now we finish it." Once Matt realized he wasn't the one steering the conversation anymore, everything accelerated. Karen helped me package the evidence properly, not as a family dispute, not as a messy sibling feud, but as what it actually was: financial fraud. Olivia, shaken and exhausted, agreed to cooperate fully once she saw how deep the deception went. She wasn't angry at first. She was stunned, then humiliated, then resolute. Matt had underestimated her, just like he underestimated everyone once he believed he was smarter than the room. We went to the authorities quietly. No dramatic accusations, no public confrontation, just facts, timelines, and documents that told a story far more clearly than any argument ever could. Detective Ramos listened carefully, asked precise questions, and took copies of everything. Bank confirmations followed within weeks. Contractors verified invoices Matt had altered. The forged signatures were undeniable. What Matt had relied on for years, his confidence that no one would look closely, finally collapsed. When the warrants came, I wasn't there. I didn't watch him get escorted out of his apartment. I didn't need to. I heard about it later, secondhand, through Karen. Laptop seized, accounts frozen. The same man who once snapped his fingers at waiters now sat in silence while his world narrowed to consequences. Matt tried to spin it at first. Misunderstandings, accounting errors, stress. But the evidence didn't budge. Multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and financial manipulation followed. He wasn't sent to prison, but probation, restitution, and strict financial oversight were imposed. His access to family accounts was terminated permanently. The golden boy reputation he'd curated for decades vanished almost overnight. Olivia filed for separation soon after. She didn't cry when she told me. She looked relieved. "I finally know I wasn't crazy," she said. "That's worth more than the marriage." She rebuilt her finances slowly, methodically, reclaiming pieces of her life that had been quietly drained. I wished her well and meant it. My parents didn't call me right away. When they finally did, it wasn't to ask me to fix anything. It was to listen. Mom cried without trying to justify it. Dad admitted he'd leaned on Matt out of fear and convenience, mistaking control for competence. "I thought he was protecting us," he said quietly. "Turns out he was keeping us dependent." They didn't ask me to forgive him. They didn't ask me to intervene. For the first time, they let me decide what role I wanted to play. I chose distance with honesty. Life, unexpectedly, got quieter after that. Daniel promoted me a few months later. The new role came with more responsibility, better pay, and autonomy. Ethan and I moved into a slightly larger apartment that quickly turned into a workshop for his robotics projects. Evenings were filled with wires, laughter, half-finished homework, and the kind of calm that doesn't demand anything from you. One summer evening, Dad hosted a small barbecue. Intentionally small. No extended family, no spectacle, just food, a few chairs, and space to breathe. I watched Ethan race across the yard toward the swing set, his laugh bright and unburdened. Mom caught my eye, tears shining, and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Dad stood straighter than I'd seen in years, like he'd finally accepted that peace doesn't come from control. Matt never contacted me again after sentencing. One frantic voicemail came through months later, full of anger and blame. I didn't listen to the end. I deleted it without ceremony. Some chapters don't deserve rereading. Driving home that night with Ethan asleep in the back seat, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt finished. For years, Matt had used my silence as a shield. He counted on my patience, my desire to keep the peace, my reluctance to be seen as difficult. Ending his game didn't require shouting or humiliation. It required clarity, proof, and the willingness to stop absorbing the damage meant for someone else. When I tucked Ethan into bed later, he murmured sleepily, "Mom, you're smiling again." I brushed his hair back gently. "Yeah," I said. "I am." That night, sitting alone in the quiet living room, I understood something I'd never been taught growing up. Peace isn't something you beg for from people who benefit from your discomfort. Peace is something you build when you finally decide you're done being controlled. And for the first time in a very long while, my life felt like it belonged to me.